Thank you very much. Is that going to do a thing? Right, well, I'm not going to bore you with the details then, because you know all this. You've eaten it, or smoked it, or taken it as a snuff. Actually, having Graham and Maya in front of me as fabulous speakers, it means that I can be liberated from the tyranny of the notes, and I can actually start to just riff off a few things, including, I think, and Graham might correct me with this, that Terence McKenna, of course, bangs on a lot about DMT, and he loves it. It's fantastic. But he mentions 5-MeO-DMT, which is one of the things that is in the Yopo bean over here. I think only once, briefly, in one of his raps. But here are these fabulous substances. They work on the serotonergic system in humans. We think of that as the brain, but of course it's also the gut. They work on the 2A receptor site. And importantly, the 2A receptor site is the receptor site which is probably upregulated during interpersonal interaction and rapid problem solving. I have a theory which is yet to be tested. I've asked David Arizzo, who runs Imperial College these days, that what we need to do is we need to get a bunch of people wired up to some sort of machine in an escape room. Because in an escape room, you have to work with a community of people to rapidly problem solve. And that's one of the things that these substances seem to activate, this rapid social problem-solving activity within us. I would also just point out that everyone thinks all the fucking research has been done. That's not true. There's loads of stuff we don't know about DMT. You know that whole thing about DMT is in the pineal gland? We've got no clue. Maybe it's in the lungs. We're really not sure. Lots and lots of this research is very, very much in its kind of early stages. And the particular research that I was involved with, perhaps I'll say this gently. So there's a rich individual who is fascinated by ayahuasca, their ayahuasca experiences. When they take ayahuasca, they tend to experience gingerbread men. Or gingerbread people, perhaps I should say. Gingerbread people. That's what they see coming towards them on a regular basis. And so they gave Imperial College several £1 million to try and figure out if the gingerbread men were real, which is fair enough. You know, you understand this sort of thing. So, look, I'm the same as you, right? I'm an occultist. So I've spent a long time bothering all sorts of spirits. So, you know, whether that's sort of elementals or gods or angelic forms or demons or servitors, you know, all these different names, all these poor fucking things out there. I'm the person up there annoying them, trying to interact with them in some fashion. So DMT, I think, is really interesting because if you give it to someone who's never spent their time hanging out with other types of weird spirits or doing scrying or playing with a Ouija board, those people have these profound experiences, which are often incredibly visual. DMT, NN-DMT is this really, really visual substance, and they may well encounter these entities. And so there's a sort of a sense that this is like a special case. People kind of come rushing towards DMT. Oh, DMT, that's where the aliens are, isn't it? And they completely forget all of the other technologies that we as occultists are familiar with in terms of ways of interacting with the spirit realm. So, God, so much of this I don't need to do now. It's really, really liberating. Let's have a look at some DMT entities, I think. That's probably a good thing to do. Here's a DMT. Here are several DMT entities. Here's my friend Alexander Biner. So he's one of the other people involved in the Breaking Convention. He's one of the directors of Europe's largest psychedelic conference. This is him smiling in a cheery way with this thing on his head in EEG, measuring his brainwaves. This, of course, you know, it's one thing to encounter entities, but there's no point unless you can put that fact on Instagram, and I'm exactly the same. So this is Ali on Instagram, talking about his entity encounter with what I'm going to go on and tell you my story about being in the extended state DMT. So extended state DMT, that's what's going on here. And over on the right-hand side, these are the beings. Behold, the psychedelic chinchilla. The psychedelic chinchilla. And this is what Ali said about it. Let me just find what he says. So he says, in the process, I encountered strange entities. A planet-sized spider enticed me to come closer and then suddenly ensnared me. By communicating with it, I had a revelation about my own fears around intimacy, a lesson that would improve my marriage in the months that followed. Handy, yeah, marriage guidance from the giant spider, what's not to like? Then I encountered colorful chinchilla-like beings who spoke to me in a visual language that I couldn't understand. I mean, nice try, guys. Nice visual language. I remember Ali saying they were making all these symbols, and every time I sort of said to them, I don't know what you're saying, they'd run around excitedly and make more symbols. So, several people were having a good time at that point. There were sly hat-wearing elves that scoped me out from a distance. And what it left Ali with was this deep curiosity. So Ali is not an occultist. He's a really, really lovely chap. He's a writer, he's all these things. So for him, this experience of suddenly finding himself face to face with the psychedelic chinchilla, wow, very powerful. If you've never done invocation, evocation, if you've never done inner world journeying or any of these sorts of things, to suddenly find yourself up close and personal with these entities is quite a thing. So, let me tell you the story. So this is me, also in the EEG cap. It takes fucking ages to put these things on. I don't know if anyone's ever done this, but it takes, and there's sort of almost like a computer game where they have to glue it to your head. And if you've got long hair like me, it's particularly annoying. Anyway, so this is me being cannulated. That is to say, I've got a line going on my left arm, and I've got a line coming out on the right. And here I am at this is the 1st of June at the Hammersmith Hospital in London. So the first part of my morning was spent in an MRI scanner, just to make sure my brain was normal. So did that, and then we spent a long time putting the cap on and getting kind of set up. I'd already been to the hospital in London where this research is being done. As I mentioned, it's under the auspice of Imperial College. So I'd already been there a couple of weeks before for the placebo session, and I'd been clubbing the night before, but I'd not been taking any drugs because, rather amusingly, the protocol for these experiments is that you can smoke yourself to death with tobacco, you can have as much booze as you like, pretty much. You can't take anything else. But I had been out dancing, nevertheless, and I found myself in the placebo, probably falling asleep, frankly, which wasn't really ideal. But I knew it was the placebo. With these sort of studies, you always do the placebo first, even though they make a big thing about, oh, it could be the real. It's not. It's definitely not. One of the things I would say is that sometimes people think that there's like us, the people taking all the drugs and doing all the cool stuff. And then there's this sort of researchers who are furrowing their brows with sort of white coats and pointing at graphs. These people who held this session, really, really good. Many of them I have met in, let's call it naturalistic settings of various descriptions. So this is not an us and them by any stretch of the imagination. But here we were trying to figure out whether or not Anton's, I mentioned his name, whether or not the gingerbread people were real. So that was a thing. Cannulas in both arms. Perhaps rather appropriately, the left arm was the one that the DMT would come in through, and then the right arm was the one where they were sampling my blood to ensure that we hit the kind of target levels. So what we're trying to do here, as was mentioned by previous speakers, is that DMT, when we take it in, say, by smoking it, we get this really strong peak of the experience, and it drops away relatively quickly. Even with something like ayahuasca, the variation in the way it's metabolized and the amount of the dose and so on means that the kind of what we sometimes describe as the sort of the peak of the flash might actually last a relatively short period of time. In this protocol, what we did was to try and extend that flash, so that peak experience, to about half an hour. So the way that the administration works is that you're lying there in the hospital chair, and of course you've got your magic crocodile by the side of you. This is me looking at what I was going to have for lunch, by the way. That's what's actually going on here. And I remember lying there in the chair and doing the thing that you do. You know, you try and relax and relax and relax. I've got some headphones on. There's some slightly irritating ambient music playing. And as I'm sitting in the chair, I can feel the doctor, the medic who's working on my left arm, and I can feel that they've got the cannula, the tube that's going into my left arm, and they pinched it, so it's not flowing yet. And then it begins to flow. And there's a fraction of a second where I smile to myself and I say, DMT, here you are. I remember you. And I see this beautiful flower of life sort of pattern in these kind of cerise colors and blue. Whoops. And then this happens. Boom. There's like a bright white light, like the brightness of Kether, like all of my memories turning on at the same time, like this complete dissolution, the sort of thing that I would expect to feel perhaps with a strong 5-MeO DMT experience. So there's no visual material as such, there is only light. And I think, shit, I'm dying, like you do. Has anyone felt that before? Yes? Oh, I've done it now. What will the children say? Oh, father died as part of an experiment. Anyway, so there's this bright white light. And all of my memories feel like they're turning on simultaneously. And then I realize, I start to understand that I'm still getting kind of feedback from the physicality of the chair that's underneath me. I can still kind of feel the people messing with the lines into my arms. And the protocol is such that what we do is a bolus injection. That means that we start with a very high dose of DMT, and then we let that decay until we get to the quotes breakthrough point, and we let that plane along for about 30 minutes, and then gradually that's taken down, and then the DMT is stopped. And the experiment takes about an hour to do. While I'm doing this, I've got eye shades on, I've got headphones, playing this slightly irritating music. It's okay. But I also have the lovely voice of one of the researchers, one of the fabulous people holding the space, and I can periodically, through the experience, the voice is saying, intensity, 0 to 10. And I have to give a number. Had I been asked at the moment of this, had I been able to make words, I would have probably had to say 10. And then, because this has been funded by the dude who wants to find out if the gingerbread people are real, they say entities, yes or no. You couldn't make it up, could you really? So, you know, I'm in this curious mixture of the sort of the medical, the magical, the entheogenic, but relatively quickly, let's do that. Relatively quickly, the thing begins to stabilize, and I find myself in a sort of alien city, and I'm high up, and I'm flying across this kind of landscape, and there are these huge towers, and they're futuristic, and they're kind of against a bright blue sky with clouds beautiful high white clouds kind of cutting across the atmosphere. And even in that moment, I think I remember saying this was a 6 out of 10. Once it had kind of stabilized and I'm in this place. And it reminded me of those magical cities that you get very often in the background of Pablo Amaringo, this ayahuasca-influenced artist. You very often see these cityscapes. And it also reminded me, even in the moment, of an experience that I had with a dear friend in Nepal, being in this high mountain, looking down at these kind of valleys below. It also reminded me of the towers that I would see outside of my room in Denver a few months after this experience, where I got to go and be at a big conference and then go and see a dude called Leonard Pickard, who you might have heard of, who's a lovely man who used to make acid, quite a lot of acid. And it also reminded me of my then partner's Sim City game, because I could see these sort of tubes and then these kind of like little blocks moving along the tubes. And I even remember thinking at the time, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing the towers that I saw as I walked up to Imperial College, up to the Hammersmith Hospital. And I'm seeing the bright blue sky that I've just come into the research environment from. So it's like my brain is kind of taking the visual material that it's recently been exposed to, and it's kind of representing this, but in this kind of hyper-real type way. And then the scene changes, and I find myself with this kind of crinoid. Yeah, so this kind of like a sea lily, this radiant symmetrical structure, which has all of these kind of limbs. And as each limb unfolds from this structure, I start to become aware of how I'm seeing something really, really interesting. So the people I was staying with before going to this piece of this experiment, a couple of friends who were very, very, very experienced psychonauts. And one of them had said to me, sometimes I take, ayahuasca or DMT and I see God, quotes. And sometimes what happens to me is I don't see God, but I end up in God's office and God's not there. And this was kind of like that. So as dear old Mr. McKenna would say, I was seeing the sort of the wiring under the board. So as each of these limbs spiraled out, I was like, okay, so this limb of this structure, I can feel how it wants to turn into Jasper. Jasper was the remarkable, beautiful cat that I just spent time with at my friend's home. And then possibly because they were ayahuasqueros, there was another limb that sort of came out, and it was like, somehow this is Brazil. And then another one that was like, somehow this is a colorful bird. So I had this sense of all of this kind of potential. It was like the sort of the silly putty of reality that if I'd needed to, I could have turned it into a jaguar or into an anaconda or into some other form. It was like almost like it was desperately trying to be something. And yet for me in that moment, it didn't arise into a self-transforming machine elf or anything else, but remained this kind of unfolding, moving potential. And I remember them saying, intensity, 0 to 10. And I said, well, it's 7 now, because I'd kind of chilled out a bit by that time. And it was like, probably not dying, remembering that I'm in an experiment. And I could kind of almost relax into it and feel this kind of underlying code. There's that whole thing at the moment about people sort of staring at lasers and taking DMT and seeing the cut. This one? If you come across this one, don't do that at home, kids. Be very careful. Lasers, very dangerous things. Anyway, so that's what happened to me. That was the kind of the core of this experience. How am I doing for time? 7 minutes? Shit. Okay, so look, what then happened was I descended through this tube. literally. So it was kind of a series of moving pathways which were red and green and beautiful, and undoubtedly modeled on the London Underground, the subway system that I've been traveling in. But bear in mind, I'm a country mouse, yes? I live in this rural place on the western spiral arm of the galaxy, very, very far away from London. So the visual material of London was really, really powerful in my mind. And the DMT, the experience, had kind of absorbed that and was representing it. Now, of course, I mean, hands up who's seen the mantis entity? Who's seen the man? Go on, it's all right, you can admit it here, it's fine. Yeah, I've seen the mantis entity. Right, so I've seen the mantis entity. I've seen various kind of entities over the years with ayahuasca and DMT. The first time I ever took ayahuasca, I remember being in a big warehouse in a place where it's legal to do ayahuasca, London. And so the mantis entity came down from the ceiling, and in the voice of a classic British comedian, Kenneth Williams, for those of you who know him, said, "Oh, isn't it nice to see you here?" So my brain is sort of, all these things, the DMT experience, one of the things that it does, I think, is that it activates these astonishing associative processes. So if we look at that Shipibo textile, it's not hard to see faces in it. And in fact, if we look at these smiley face, sad face, well, they're not really faces. They're not faces in the way that we're actually faces, because we human beings, particularly when we activate this system that's to do with social problem solving, we engage with these experiences as if, to use the phrase of Hans Verhinger or Ostnosman Speer, they become these apparent entities really, really, really easy. Now, of course, this is not me saying that these things are not real. As Maya brilliantly pointed out earlier on, that's not actually the issue here. The issue is, how do we understand and how do we interact with these processes? What's going on here? If you want to understand a little bit about what I think is a very, very good suggestion as to why tryptamines, DMT, NN-DMT, ayahuasca work, I would recommend the work of the Qualia, what are they actually called? Let me just look this up. So this is Andreas, isn't it? Yes, Andreas Gomez Emilson from the Qualia Research Institute. That's QRI.org. So there's a very, very good model of what happens in the DMT state in terms of the mathematics of visual perception. This is not the same, like I say, of saying that these things are not real. It's rather like saying when we see a vision in a black mirror, for instance, the entities are not in the black mirror. They're not sort of hidden behind the black mirror. But this is this kind of, we place ourselves in this kind of fractal world, and then our ability to experience entityness, which is what our hominid psyche is absolutely geared up to do. That's why we could see those pictures of the happy face and smiley face as people with emotional qualities. It provides a kind of, a scrying environment from which these things can emerge. And interestingly, in the work of these people, one of the things they've been working with is 5-MeO-DMT, and one of the fascinating things that they've discovered, and it's an early finding, it needs to be replicated and so on, is that if you give somebody 5-MeO-DMT, which gives this powerful kind of non-dual experience, and you have someone who's a very skilled meditator, one of the weird things is that the skilled meditator can get to higher states of meditative absorption, it would seem, because there's another mind in the room that's having this non-dual experience. So there is definitely some kind of non-local quality to the way this information moves. I think of it really like, like waves on the ocean. All the things that we experience as arising selfhood entities are like from the underlying ground of awareness. I'm a panpsychist and an animist, and I like to think that all things have some kind of selfhood, perhaps some kind of agency, some sort of intention. We can see it with humans. I mean, look at yourself. Look at yourself. Just look at your bloody self. You are this kind of you're this energy structure through which matter is moving, right? So we're breathing in, we're breathing out, we're absorbing food and drink, and we're excreting, and then this kind of energy pattern exists. Eventually, it sort of seems to decay down into nothing, but that's what we are. We're this kind of standing wave, if you like, through which the matter moves. And if we're occultists and we're magicians, we can see anything that way. Not necessarily just in the DMT state, but anything. If you go to a library is this complex interaction of thoughts and ideas and stories and meaning, and approached in the right sort of way, perhaps you might want to smoke DMT in your library and see if you can interact with the spirit of the library that way. So if we provide this animist approach to things, we can see anything as having this spirit embedded within it. Luckily, we don't need to have intravenous DMT. We've got things like psilocybin. And you can see that there's not much difference with the molecular structure. It doesn't always give away as to how these things actually operate in the body. But essentially, psilocybin is converted to psilocin when we take it. This is orally active DMT. So same sort of moderately high doses of psilocybin provide a state which is very, very similar, distinguishable, but nevertheless very, very similar to the states that we can get in with extended state DMT. What these substances do is they do much what they do in nature. So if you think about the way that mushrooms work, what many mushrooms do is they take dead material and they break it down so that new stuff can emerge. And that's what they do for us psychologically. They take what we these days tend to bang on about in terms of our trauma, or certainly our experience, and they allow those things to fall apart so that new possibilities can arise. They also, interestingly, particularly things like DMT, probably have a lot of benefits in terms of neurological difficulties, damage that people have. You might be a bit thoughtful about this, but if you ever have a stroke, if you've got access to some DMT, I recommend that you take it. In fact, there's some research at the moment sort of ongoing from a guy called Edie Fretzker and various others, that these things may provide protection from oxidative stress and damage, and could be one of the reasons that DMT is found in so many life forms. And certainly for myself, I found something really interesting from this experience. So I've got a sort of a confession, really. I had a thing called idiopathic pericarditis, so inflammation of the tissues around the heart. And I didn't let on because I didn't want to not have the experiment. So from the extended state DMT, what happened was that condition was completely cured. So something that had persisted for a couple of years, gone. And afterwards, I felt fantastic. In fact, the first words I remember saying to the researchers afterwards were, again. So nearly up at time, I just want to exit through the gift shop. I've written a book. It's about trip sitting. You might like it. Please support myself and my children's education by buying a copy or two. One for best and one to actually read. Here are some references. So both to the original research, some of the references to the Qualia Research Institute's work on DMT visuals, and another convincing link to go and buy my book, and that's my website. Thank you very, very much for listening. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.